Redfin data shows that 16.3% of homes that went under contract in December were canceled, which was over 40,000 deals, marking the highest cancellation rate for December in Redfin's records dating back to 2017. Atlanta, Georgia led at 22.5%, while San Francisco sat near 4.2%, and that spread isn't random. It tells you what's happening differently in each particular market. And today I'll translate those numbers into action, and I'll touch on how affordability and inventory shift your odds, why inspection contingencies are back on the negotiating table, and where buyers are now selective and scoring the best deals because sellers outnumber them by a record margin. We'll also cover the likely lag effect going into 2026 and how the power of choice has shifted things into the first solid buyer's market in years. Choice is a weapon, but if buyers finally have options, why are more of them going under contract and then backing out at the last minute? For years, sellers called the shots. Short supply meant bidding wars, waived inspections, and take it or leave it terms. But today, that's flipped because more active listings and housing affordability at an all-time low means that buyers can go under contract, keep shopping, and close only if the deal stays competitive. Walking away doesn't carry the same penalty that it used to because there's plenty of other options down the street and scarcity is no longer a thing. The contract has simply become more of a temporary hold and doesn't necessarily guarantee a close. So why are contracts falling apart? Well, because in this market, walking is rational. You see, inventory is at an all-time high, and if sellers don't want to play ball, well, there's a seller down the street that will. And Redfin's chief economist, Chen Zhao, says that buyers are willing to walk if they think that they can find a better or more affordable home, and that is the mindset that's driving the 16.3% average cancellation rate. The truth is that active listings are higher today than they were a year ago in many metros. Days on market is stretching, and the buyer pool is thinning thanks to a payment shock from higher rates, meaning that nationally there's over 631,000 more sellers, which is the largest gap on record dating back to 2013. Sellers are competing for fewer qualified buyers, so every contingency turns into leverage for the buyer. An inspection flags the roof, the buyer asks for a credit. An appraisal comes in below list price, and this gives you an opportunity to renegotiate. And savvy buyers know this, and they know that the longer a listing sits, the softer the market gets, and the softer the seller gets, and the easier it is to trade up to get a better deal. And the softening isn't happening in every market. Agents are pointing to fear around the economy, as well as certainty around mortgage rates as the causes that are pushing more owners to list now rather than gamble on later. And this, as a result, has increased the supply in a market of cautious demand, which is why buyers hold the keys. The truth is that this isn't happening in all markets, but it's easy to spot where it is. Where cancellations run most rampant, in cities like Atlanta, Georgia, where 22.5% of contracts were canceled, buyers hold more cards because comparable homes are available and more keep hitting the market every single day. Atlanta is now in a strong buyer's market, with sellers outnumbering buyers by over 80%. But in tight tech hubs like San Jose, it's a different story, where around only 8.9% are canceling, and in San Francisco, it's sat near 4.2% because the situation isn't exactly the same and it's more of a balanced market. And the truth is that agents are reporting a widening gap between the number of people trying to sell and the number of people who can actually buy at today's payments, and that imbalance creates inspection, appraisal, and financing contingencies as opportunities that buyers are using to cancel contracts, and investors are exploiting this by planning backup offers, tracking price cuts, and structuring earnest money to go hard later to make sure they get a better deal. If a better house drops or a seller won't move on the price or negotiate on terms, buyers are able to pivot, with the only real cost being time lost, which is a real cost, and although time is money, it's better than trying to catch a falling knife. Here's the bottom line. Choice gives buyers the power to test deals in real time, and when a deal cracks, it's usually because of a few predictable pressure points. The truth is that most cancellations come down to three variables. Let's start with overpricing. Some sellers are clinging to peak era comp from 2022 and post a number that only worked when rates were 3 points lower and choices were thin. Today, buyers don't argue. Instead, they run the monthly numbers after going under contract, and if the payment stings and 3 similar properties sit within a mile, they'll sign, inspect, and then walk when the seller won't come down to market. And the effect of having so much inventory to choose from is brutal for sellers. In areas with surplus supply, it's an easy exit when a stubborn seller won't budge. And the next break point isn't price, it's monthly affordability, or rather lack thereof, because even with small dips from last year's highs and prices coming down substantially, monthly payments still hover near cycle peaks because prices didn't fall enough to offset the increases in mortgage rates, insurance, taxes, as well as HOA fees, and a tiny rate move during escrow, even just an eighth or a quarter of a point, can add a real cost over the year. year. And then once you add in an HOA that might be resetting reserves, or an insurance quote that was adjusted for wildfire or hurricane risk, especially in places like Florida, or a county reassessment that bumps taxes, and suddenly your payment jumps a few $100s, and this affects people's debt to income ratios and therefore their approvals. And because lenders recheck DTI, or debt to income ratio, right before closing, if a buyer's DTI edges past the threshold of affordable, the approval can fall apart, or the buyer needs more cash to close, or a last minute price cut to make the deal work. So what's happening now is the deal doesn't blow up at the offer, it cracks at the final audit because affordability doesn't pencil. And according to Redfin, mortgage payments are cited as the primary motivator behind cancellations. Even when the stated reason is an inspection issue, the underlying driver is often that payment is simply too much, although Redfin expects affordability to improve slightly in 2026 as wages for some will outpace housing costs, while the middle class will still feel this pinch. And the third reason contracts are getting canceled, well, it's urgent repairs from inspections. Because right now deferred maintenance is showing up in big ticket items including roofs with damage, HVAC at end of life, electrical panels that are fire hazard and therefore uninsurable, foundation cracks, as well as corroded sewer lines. And currently structural issues flagged during inspections are being cited as a leading cause of cancellations. And in a buyer's market, these act as an opportunity for buyers already wary of high costs to back out of the deal. If a roof needs to be replaced before closing in order for insurance to bind, buyers often cancel instead of asking for a credit. And if buyers do ask for completion before closing and credits tied to real bids, when sellers refuse, often because they're squeezed by their next purchase, or more commonly, they're just anchored to old prices and stubborn, buyers move their earnest money to a cleaner property with less issues. The truth is that price, payments, and inspection issues are all back in play, and buyers aren't waiving contingencies. The fixable piece is often payments, not by changing rates, but by changing structure. With pending sales down 9%, closed sales in early to mid 2026 are likely to be weak, which gives buyers more room to ask for concessions. And this is why buyers are asking for rate buydowns with closing credits to offset PMI as well as prepaid taxes. Meanwhile, investors are running pre-inspections with a contractor ready to go, and they keep a signed backup property warm in case the seller balks at any objections. Here's the bottom line. These same triggers don't show up everywhere. They are concentrated where buyers have the most choice, and that's where seller psychology is starting to crack. And we'll talk about the specific markets where sellers are cracking shortly, but if you're enjoying this content so far and want to support the channel, please hit the like button for the algorithm and consider subscribing. It's a free way you can show support, and it's much appreciated. So here's the truth. This isn't a nationwide occurrence. The gap between different markets is real. Case in point in places like Atlanta versus San Francisco, where we have two entirely different scenarios playing out. But regardless of which market you're in, here's the three metrics that you need to look at to determine what's going on and where buyers' markets are strongest. Number one is high cancellation rates. 2, high active listings. And 3, slow pending sales. In markets where those are lining up, like Atlanta, seller psychology is breaking down earlier and they're getting more flexible. Because in places like Atlanta, owners are recalculating the cost of holding versus the pain of adjusting to current market rates. And in markets like this, builders put additional pressure because they have quotas and they have deadlines. Flippers are stuck staring at carrying costs. And honestly, anyone that has the balls to flip in today's market is huevos grande, because this is not the time to be flipping. That's just my opinion. You can do what you want. But the bottom line is that just because a metro has a high cancellation rate doesn't necessarily make it a good buy. Some places are flashing red because rents are soft, insurance is spiking, and job growth is waning. But the trap is chasing a discount where deals simply don't pencil and the expenses don't make sense. The truth is the buy signals look different everywhere, and that could be a high cancellation city that also has a stable job market, stable rent demand, and balanced inventory where prices are negotiable but not collapsing. And the real work is figuring out which one you're in before writing a deal. So let's take a look at some of the metros with the highest and lowest cancellation rates. First, high cancel metros include Atlanta at over 22% and places like Jacksonville as well as San Antonio nearing 21%. On the low side, you have Nassau County, New York, which sits around 4%, San Francisco near 4.5%, and San Jose at almost 9%. And that range should give you an idea of where options are plentiful and where there still might be inventory constraints to navigate before you consider going under contract. And if you're wondering why these particular metros are affected differently, the truth is that in some belt metros, you have a few factors working against you, because first, there's been a massive pipeline of new builds and a lot of inventory coming on the market. And in these metros, a buyer can pivot 2 blocks over and find an identical floor plan in addition to a builder incentive like a rate buy down or a closing credit, stacked on top of any discounts, making that property more attractive and new. And what this does is it gives buyers the power of choice and increases cancellations. But like I said, this isn't happening everywhere, because on the coast, it's a different story, with the exception being Florida, because you have land constraints coupled with zoning limits, as well as slower build cycles from heavy regulation. And what these do is they all reduce backup options. And when buyers have fewer backups, they aren't as confident pushing back on contingencies because there might not be another option down the street. And here's how timing can hand you the edge as a buyer. You see, December cancellations tend to bleed into softer January and February closings, which we've seen. As a result, sellers face double payments after holiday moves, property tax bills come due, and some builders chase fourth quarter targets, which all increase competition. So if you want to get the best deal and get your contingencies accepted, here's how to approach it. When asking for a repair credit, include a specific bid for the work, ask for temporary or permanent rate buydowns that fix the payment, or the seller can fix the price tag, ask for help with closing costs to reduce your cash needed to close, and add an early reinspection date tied to repair completion so decisions arrive before your contingencies expire. And as an investor, here's how you underwrite rents. First, pull current insurance quotes, not last year's. Do not trust their quotes. You want to model property taxes with realistic reassessments based on the new reassessed value, and look at comps from the past 1 to 3 months to track price cuts, not the past 1 to 3 years. And you want to look at the 3 closest competing listings to the property. If prices are dropping, your contingency objection just gained leverage, and these are all things that can be used in negotiating a solid deal. The truth is that seller fatigue means better terms and better numbers. So now that you can spot the breakpoints and things to look for, the next move is using this to your advantage in real world terms. The bottom line is that choice gives you the leverage, and with record inventory, this is why cancellations are up. They're market signals that buyers and sellers need to pay attention to, and when buyers can walk, sellers have to come to the table with concessions, repairs, and realistic expectations. So here's your playbook. Pay attention to price cuts and cancellations by zip code. Get lender quotes with permanent and or 2-year buy down options, because the truth is rates are likely to come down in the next 2 years. If you're more risk averse and you would just prefer to have a fixed lower payment for 30 years rather than worrying about a 2-year option, then go for that. And ask for point credits at closing, and be firm and realistic with repair credits. Get quotes on any likely repairs with the contractor beforehand so you can trade repairs for price concessions quickly, and ask for re-inspections after repairs to protect your earnest money and objection deadlines. And if you're interested in working with me and need help as a buyer and seller, there's a link in the description on how you can get in touch, as well as opportunities for investors who are interested in networking. And right now there's a few videos popping up on the screen that YouTube thinks you should watch, so make sure you check those out if you haven't done so already, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.